Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Michael Fraud, and I'm the Assistant Program Director for Drisha. Very excited to have everyone here for our pre-Pesach Yom Iyun today on Seder and Sacrifice, Pesach in historical perspective. We're going to have two sessions back-to-back today. And I'm very happy to have everyone here for the beginning of our first session, Adoption or Resistance, the Structure of the Seder and the Greco-Roman Symposium, with Dr. Yair Furstenberg. Dr. Firstenberg is the chair of the Talmud department at Hebrew University of Jerusalem, where his research focuses on the history of early rabbinic literature and law within its Greco-Roman context. In his publications, he has examined the emergence of the rabbinic movement, as well as the evolution of the Mishnah, and his current project aims to integrate rabbinic legal activity into its Roman provincial context. He is also the founder and has served as a co-gabbai of Hakel, Minyan Shivyoni Baka. We're very excited for this class, which is going to explore the ways in which, while both Jewish and Christian authors in Antiquity openly confronted Greek and Roman practices of dining and celebration, the rabbis shaped the most important meal of the Jewish calendar year in very similar ways to the Greco-Roman Symposium. So we're going to be exploring the cultural significance of this choice. And while various scholars have debated this question, Dr. Firstenberg is going to be providing a new perspective on this issue through a close analysis of the structure of the Seder in the Mishnah. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Firstenberg, and very excited to learn together with everyone today.
Thank you very much, Michael. Shalom to everybody from Jerusalem. I'm privileged to sit in my office on Mount Scopus right now. And as Michael described my own work, and I very much appreciate the kind presentation. My work focuses on the cultural and legal context of the rabbinic activity. And one thing, with the rabbis in the first centuries, were active within the Roman Empire, had close contact with Greek-speaking inhabitants of the empire. They knew some kind of, on some level, Greek rhetoric. They were aware of some names in the Greek world. They were very much challenged by the cultural alternative of the Greco-Roman world. So one thing that is always in the background of my own work, and in a sense also of trying to understand the big project of the rabbis, is how to understand the way they accommodate to the cultural surroundings, and how to understand their acculturation of the Roman world. Now, there is one big problem, and that will be the issue that will lead us today in our discussion. The big problem is, and it's again and again I encounter this question in my own work, is what is the cultural significance of a partial resemblance? Okay, I'll say that again, because that's exactly the point. When you compare the rabbis, their own world, their own activity, to Greek and Roman activities, intellectual, legal activities around them, so it always seems that it's somehow very similar, but not exactly, doesn't exactly fit. The rabbis didn't really speak Greek, they didn't really speak Latin, they weren't really involved on the one hand. On the other hand, you read, for example, Pirkei Avot, and you have a feeling there that you have something of a Stoic Roman philosophy, ethical philosophy. You read the Mishnah on the law, and you say, this is not exactly Roman law, but this is something very similar. We always encounter a partial resemblance. And when you have a partial resemblance, you can go two opposite directions, right? One direction would be that the rabbis are adopting, right? They're taking ideas, practices from their surrounding, and they're adopting it to their own world. They appreciate what they see around them, and they're adopting. But when you depends, but if you see the full half of the glass or the empty one, right? So the other possibility would be that there is a resemblance because they're living within the same world, obviously. Even if you're the most separatist group, you're still part of a larger culture. But so although there is some level of similarity, what they're really trying to do is to separate themselves from the world around them and trying to be more different than similar. And again, because it's always very complicated. That's a fact. There's never a simple way, and the rabbis also don't offer us a reflection of their own practices. They have the law, they have the halacha, and they don't say we are for the Romans, we are adopting, we're not adopting. So we have to try to find ways to understand rabbinic ideology through this kind of encounter and partial encounter with their surrounding. So the Seder, the Pesach Seder, is maybe the most famous case for such a question, because what you do find in the Pesach Seder, very famously, there are multiple features of the Seder that are similar to the Greco-Roman banquet, and specifically to the symposium, the festive drinking together after the meal. And here I should just be clear about the terms that we're using, right? The Romans would come together for a feast, for a banquet, and later on I'll give a more detailed structure, but they would come together, they would recline on the couches. If you want, I'll show you a nice picture or a mosaic showing that you see them reclining. This is a mosaic I personally like very much. They're reclining on the couches. The structure of the couches changed in the first centuries, but anyhow, you like this half a circle, and you have the slaves giving them all the food, and you have, this is part of the celebration, and they would drink together, they would sing together, you would have actors coming and showing and performing, and you have the banquet and the symposium, literally meaning drinking together, symposia, drinking together the wine. They would have, that would come on the later stage after the meal itself. So you have the drinking, and you have also, and we'll see that more in a moment, you have this is an occasion to have discussions. If you're a group of learned philosophers or whatever, you would develop a whole philosophical or literary discussion. It would be an opportunity for a more elaborate way of philosophizing. So we have this occasion of feasting together, reclining, eating, drinking, talking over the food, talking about the food, talking about literature and philosophy, and all that in very general terms is quite similar to what happens in Leil HaSeder. We all know that everybody must recline, lehasev, right? We all know that drinking is a major aspect of the structure of Leil HaSeder. We all know that there is the Hallel, the singing, and there is the more philosophical talk, right? We talk all night, or as long as we can. We talk about the Exodus from Egypt, and we do that while we're eating. So you can easily imagine the people here. The food here is not kosher, I checked, that you can see on the floor, but in general, otherwise, it's easily imagine, right, this kind of drinking wine, talking, and shared festivity, to be like a Jewish, to be this Jewish event, the Leil HaSeder. Now,
I'm sorry, what was the occasion? What is the occasion for the symposium?
no, there is no specific occasion. Any
So it could be done every day or once a year? Or
yeah, I mean, you can decide if you want to come together. There's no set fixed occasion for such a symposium. Again, it would mean that, again, and I have to emphasize that the symposium is in making the meal, adding to the meal. You have the basic meal, but once you decide to continue on, so you continue into the symposium, to the drinking together after the meal. Now, so I mean, long ago, scholars noticed the similarity, and they were discussing what is the significance of the similarity. And again, as I said before, when you have a partial similarity, you'll have two opposing options. One option is to say that the rabbis and later the Haggadah of Pesach chose the symposium as a model for shaping their own form of discussion and teaching. So if you have the temple has been destructed, you have to recreate this important meal in new ways, focused not on eating the sacrifice, but on talking and teaching and delivering the ideas of Leil HaSeder. So how do you do that? You take the model of the symposium, the dominant cultural model of the Romans, and you adapt it and adapt, right? Adapt elements from it. Obviously won't be 100% the same thing, but it's so similar. So this is your model. And the person that represents this is a famous article by Sigrid Stein, The Influence of Symposial Literature on the Literary Form of the Pesach Haggadah. And he develops this idea the most. And I'll just read one paragraph from his article many years ago. So he points out specific elements that are similar, like the reclining, like specific foods that you eat and talk on. Those are ideas that you find in the symposium. But more than words and dinner habits are here involved. Since Plato, a literary species, the so-called symposia, has developed, in which a description was given of a banquet held by a few learned men who had met at a friend's house to discuss scientific, philosophical, ethical, aesthetical, grammatical, dietetic, and religious themes over a glass, and very often over a barrel of wine, after they had dined together. So they dined together and they continued the discussion afterwards. Plutarch, one of the most famous contributors to Sympotic literature and the younger contemporary of Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, and Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Tarfon, summarizes earlier practice and a theory in the following manner: a symposium is a communion of serious and mirthful entertainment, discourse, and action. So this is the way we really make most of the event, right? Enjoy ourselves, but also use it for studying. So it is meant to further a deeper insight into those points that were debated at table, for the remembrance of those pleasures which arise from meat and drink is ungenital and short-lived. But the subject of philosophical queries and discussions remain always fresh after they have been imparted, and they are relished by those who were absent as well as by those who were present at dinner. So you have this form of elevated kind of joy through the discussions in the symposium. So you can see the rabbis taking these ideas and implementing them into their own practice after the destruction of the temple. Now, against this position, a contrary position was promoted by Baruch Boxer in a book called The Origin of the Seder. And he has a chapter inside his book called what the title is, a Jewish Symposium, ? Right? Is it true? Is it the best explanation of the event? Now, Boxer admits that there are some elements that are similar, but he says that that is the result of the fact that the rabbis are living within a general environment, a Greco-Roman environment. Furthermore, he shows that both Jewish and Christian writers of the time are aware of these kinds of feasts, and they make sure to present their own way of dining in a contrast to the Roman way. So the Roman is not a model, but it's a negative model. And if it brings a few examples, but a very good example is Philo, a person that a Jewish Hellenistic philosopher living in Alexandria in the 1st century, writing in Greek. I mean, he's like the most Hellenized Jew we know of the period. So if there is someone that we can say that he really absorbed Greek and Roman ideas, it's Philo. But when he comes to describe the meal of a group of Jews that he called therapoitai, and this is like a sectarian group, in his book called The Contemplative Life. And he wants to, so when he describes their gathering, he emphasizes that the whole structure of all what they do is in opposition to the way the Romans feast. So you see that the model is a negative model, and I'll read a few lines. I wish also to speak of their common assemblages and the cheerfulness of their convivial meals as compared with those of other people. Some people, when they have filled themselves with strong drinks, behave as though they had drunk not wine, but some witch poison, charged with frenzy and madness and anything more fatal than can be imagined to overthrow their reason. Some perhaps may approve the method of banqueting now prevalent everywhere through hankering for the Italian expensiveness and luxury emulated both by Greeks and non-Greeks who make the arrangements for ostentation rather than festivity. So he knows very well the kind of feast that happen, and he even knows that there are models of symposium that are positive on the whole. He says there is even Plato's symposium and Xenophon. These are classical literary models of a symposium. Yet even these, if compared with those of our people who embrace the contemplative life, would appear as matters for derision. So the way you distinguish your own people from others is by means of creating a different mode of eating, or different mode of dining and feasting. So you have the wild feast, and you have our own, and we really know how to do it in order to develop the correct contemplation, or to enable the contemplation, and not only be create some kind of uncontrolled party. Now, is there a way to decide, to determine what was the rabbi's intention? Were there more in favor of this model, or did they make sure to distinguish themselves from that model? How do we check that? Right? Is there a textual way? Now, I'm a scholar of text, so I return to the rabbis, return to the Mishnah, right? And again, the rabbis never give explicit statements about their intention. That's not the way. It's not their form of expression. Their form of expression is detailed halacha, and from the details of halacha, we can try and reconstruct their intention. So there is one very strong Boxer, taking his model from Philo, says also the rabbis are doing the same thing. In fact, when you look at the Seder in the Mishnah, he says the Mishnah is very, very much structured. It's very careful. The amount of wine that you drink is very precise. it's very, I would say in general, the Seder is a ritualized event. It has clear rules. It's not like the very fluid, fun event of the symposium. So even if they're aware, I mean, he says they are aware of it, but in order to make sure that it's different, that it's sober, that it's in control, they give you very detailed halachot, right? Now, the best example, I think, the best case for this argument is from the Mishnah at the end of the Seder in Tractate Psachim and Masechet Psachim. One of the last laws is En maftirin achar apesach afikuman. One may not conclude the Pesach lamb, the Pesach, with an afikuman. Now the problem is, we don't know what the word afikuman is when you read the Mishnah. What does it mean? So here are some interpretations that are offered already by the rabbis in the Tosefta and in the Yerushalmi, and they're different, but they all come together to one general kind of picture. What is the afikuman? The afikuman, the Tosefta suggests that afikuman are nuts, dates, pitzuchim. What I don't know how to say that in English. All kinds of things that you eat, toasted stuff that you eat. Now, or according to the Yerushalmi, singing, right? You have these singing or sweets that you bring out, or even very delicate kind of foods, very intricate kind of delicacies. Now, and the last interpretation, that one should not leave one group and join another group. You can't move from group to group. So if you take all these are examples of a fikuman. So if you take them all together, what you get is what we would call an after party. So the Mishnah said, you finished with the meal, you finished with the Pesach, right? Do not continue on with your partying all night. Do not leave your own group and go party with others. Do not stroll around the streets to find others to party with. Do not just have just take more to eat and then just continue on with all these just fun stuff that you do during the night. I know my son that's what he does all night when he's in a Shabbat with his friends after the meal. So he goes out of the house and then he sits and he has all the nuts that he eats and he moves around from place to place. That's what you do. No. So the Mishnah says, no, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to continue with this after party. And Lieberman, who's the authoritative commentator on the Tosefta, I'll translate, says, when the wild party would come to its peak, people would go from house to house and make others join them in the party, and then they would just go around the city and enjoy themselves. So the Mishnah, what the Mishnah is doing according to this interpretation, is exactly setting the limit, saying we're aware of the fact that regularly the symposium continues with these parties, but we're not like that. So using a Greek word, epikomion, going out, using this Greek word and saying, oh, this is the limit. It's similar, you're right. We had all parts of the meal, and including we had quite a few glasses to drink, but stop there. Don't continue. Don't think that this is the standard Greek a wild party, and we have to have limits. So I think that's a strong argument to say that the rabbis are aware of the similarity and trying to limit it. What I want to do is make the argument more subtle, right? And I want to use if you ask me, do I agree with Stein or with Boxer? I agree with neither of them. Actually, I offer a third way to understand what the rabbis are trying to do. Until now, we spoke in like there was a dichotomy. Are we like the non-Jews? Do we act like them, or do we resist this kind of activity? And I think what the rabbis are suggesting is more subtle. But in order to understand that, we have to look more carefully into the structure of the Seder. And here I'll try and just survey the structure of the meal. That's, I think, the most important thing in order to understand. Also, an important way to prepare to the Seder is to understand the structure of the meal. But before talking about the Seder, I'll talk about the standard meal. The rabbis also describe the structure of a standard meal. And how do they do that? They do that in the Masechet Brachot, when they talk about blessings. When you bless, what part of the meal do you do the blessing on the food? So the Tosefta actually gives us a very insightful description of the way they would, the structure of the standard meal. Again, not the standard meal, but maybe a high class meal. But still, this is not a unique, not something that happens only once a year. Ketzad Seder Seuda. What is the order of the meal? The order of the meal is divided into two structures, two stages. First stage, guests come in and sit down on top of benches and on sofas and soft seats until all guests come in. That's the first stage. At that stage, the servants wash their hands, and they wash only one hand, because this is a stage of the hors d'oeuvres. They're not eating the full meal. They don't need two hands. They only need one hand, right, to eat the vegetables or the appetizers, right? So they wash one of their hands, and they say a blessing on the appetizer that they're eating, and they're still sitting. They're not reclining, because this is not the main part of the meal yet. They're sitting around waiting for everybody to come in. Once they're ready, they move to the center of the traklin. The traklin is where the couches are set around in like a U shape, right? And they recline on the sofas, and that's the second stage. After the guests have gotten up from their temporary seats, moved to the main eating hall and reclined on the beds, there the servants again wash their hands, and again they drink wine. This is the second time they're getting wine, right? They're washing both hands. They're again drinking wine, and the Tosefta tells us they have to say the blessing again. That's a technical issue that the Tosefta is concerned with, how many times we have to say the blessing. But you see here a clear distinction between the stage of the appetizers and the main part of the meal, and each stage opens with a glass of wine, right? Now, this is a standard meal. Now, we also know from other sources, not here, but we know from other sources that it's very interesting that it even describes, it didn't bring the whole text, it even describes that at some point you're not allowed to enter the meal anymore. It's not, it's rude to come late. So after some stages, let's close the door and don't allow any more guests to come in. Now, what we know that besides these two stages, when we end the meal, that's a standard practice on Birkat Hamazon, on the last blessing over the food, we also drink wine, right? There's also that wine just to end the meal. So a basic meal is one course. A festive meal is a course with appetizers, right? That we have appetizers before, and then we have two glasses, and with the two glasses, we have a third glass in the Birkat Hamazon at the end of the meal. Against this background, let's move to the structure of Leil Seder. Now, it's very important to see that linguistically, this is the 10th chapter of Masechet Pesachim. Linguistically, all of the chapter is built around the glasses of wine. there are 4 glasses of wine, and every stage of the meal is defined by the glass of wine. I'll I put it in bold so you can see. First, we have the first cup in Mishnah 2. Then you have the second cup. That's the main part, and we'll talk about this in a moment. And then you have the third cup over Birkat HaMazon, the benediction over the meal. And then you have the fourth cup of the Halil, right? Now, what is the relationship? So now, you see another structured meal, but what is the relationship between this big structured event to the basic meal that we saw in the previous text? So I think it's very easy, and it has, it has implications. When we compare, we understand better things that are not explicit in the Mishnah, in Psachim, but we can understand them from the comparison. So the first cup is like the first cup that we saw above, at the stage of the appetizers. And indeed, after Mishnah 2 talks about the Kiddush, how you say the Kiddush of the first cup, right? Then, number 3, when the table is brought before him, Heviu lefanav, it doesn't say what you bring before him, but I think the most simple interpretation is they bring a table, because if you remember from the picture I had here, they don't have one table that they sit around. Each or a few of the people have the table, and they bring the tables in and out with the new dish, right? So if you you have the first table, and what do they have on the first table? Appetizers. Mitabel b'chazeret, right? You have this lettuce, and you dip the lettuce, and that's the vegetables. That's what we call kalpas in our today. That's what's called the stage of the kalpas. That's the appetizer, and that's what they do. And they just nash on the appetizer until they come to the breaking of the bread, to the main meal. So there is some stage, the first stage. You don't say what's happening here. Actually, it's like the first stage in the previous text. There's no instructions of what should happen. This is appetizer. We just nash. We eat vegetables until we get to the main part of the meal, including, of course, the matzah, including the sacrifice in the temple, right? Then we get to the second cup. Now, the second cup is the cup of the main meal, as we saw in the previous text. So that would mean that they take the first table and bring again a table with the main course, and then they have the second cup. Mazgulo kos sheni. The biggest problem when reading the Mishnah, this chapter, is that it never says when you eat the meal. Most of us, I think, suffer from the fact that the Mishnah doesn't say anything explicit about it, and we wait with the meal until after all the talking. In the Mishnah, after all the talking happens only here, where you see all this blank space. Here is food in our structure of our Haggadah. But that's not what the Mishnah says. The Mishnah doesn't say that you wait until after all the talking. I mean, what you have here, again, just to show you, it says you bring the food, you bring the second table. After the first table of the appetizers, you bring the main course. You pour the second cup, right? And then you talk, and then you have the benediction over the meal with the third cup. So when do you eat? I think the most simple assumption is, and again, that's why I'm saying we have to compare the two texts. We know that you eat when you drink the second cup. How do we know that? We know that from this previous text that we saw, right? After coming and reclining from going into the main course and reclining and washing the hands again, getting a glass of wine, and now you start the main meal. That's the meaning of the standard meal. The Mishnah doesn't even have to say that you eat, because that's the standard meaning of the second cup. What the Mishnah adds is that the second cup is used not only for eating, because you already have the main course in front of you. Look, the Mishnah says that. Until he comes to the breaking of the bread, they bring before him, this is the main course, the unleavened bread and lettuce and the chavoset and the meat. Now, should we assume that it sits on the table and gets cold, right, until we finish all our talking? Or should we assume that we brought out the meal and we'll start eating? But at the same time, we also talk, right? And so I think that's the most simple understanding of the Mishnah. First glass for the appetizers, second glass for the main meal, including all the talking. And what does the talking include? First, it includes the questions, as we know, the arba kushiot, the son asks his father, etc. Then we have the midrash, right, with basic principle of beginning with disgrace and ending with glory, saying the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim from the disgrace to the glory, and then interpreting Pesach, Matzah, Umaror, the symbolic meaning of each of these foods, and then starting to recite the Hallel. And here's happens something strange. We don't finish the reciting the Hallel. We finish the meal with this third cup, and then the Mishnah says very briefly, over a fourth cup, he completes the Hallel and says after it the benediction over the song, what's called Birkat Hashir, the big Hallel, the large Hallel, Hodu LaHashem Kitov. This is the stage after the Birkat HaMazon. So if we, on the most technical level, on the structural level, what is the relationship between the Seder and the symposium? Where is the symposium within? How do we identify the symposium within this structure? I think the simple answer is here in the fourth cup, because until the third cup, we're within the standard meal. Have a first course, main course, Birkat HaMazon, but here comes another thing that we don't have anywhere else. We have a fourth cup. The fourth cup adds another stage, and that stage is regularly called a symposium, the stage that we drink together. So so it's clear, it is clearly a structure of a symposium, right? So the rabbis are doing something that they're borrowing from their cultural environment, but at the same time, we must notice that it is a strange way to borrow the practice of a symposium, the structure of the symposium, right?
Can I ask a question, Yair?
Yeah, please, Sarah.
We talk here about talking. So from when do we read instead of talk? Because we read from the Haggadah, right?
Right, that's much later.
So it's easier to eat and talk than eat and read. Can we agree on this?
You're right, that's true. You're right. If what happened to the Haggadah, and I mean what you're saying is something that happened much later. But this is part, again, when you look at the Seder, there are two basic approaches. And they're similar to the two approaches that I said before. You can either see this as a defined ritual, very precise ritual that you have to follow, right? The second model is saying, no, this gives you general instructions, right? And now fill these instructions however you would like, right? So I think that the part of the talking, it doesn't give you very specific instructions. It gives you a structure. It gives you, there are questions, there are basic questions, there are topics that you want to talk about, and from there on, you can do whatever you want, right? You don't have to read a specific text. That's not, the Mishnah doesn't talk about reading. That happens much later, only when the Haggadah, the text of the Haggadah, develops in the Middle Ages. Now, I'll stop sharing, and I just, Amalia, you wanted to ask something, please.
Yes, I wanted to know, was there any rationale in using a Greek word, afikoman?
Yeah, you have to use a Greek word. That's exactly, it's the, what the rabbis are doing, they're pointing to a practice, a foreign practice that everybody is aware of, and saying, do not do that practice. There's no way to use a Hebrew word in order to denote something that is a foreign practice, right? So they're using a Greek just as a way to distinguish between their own way and the way others do it. Okay? So
you had mentioned that the rabbis noticed there was a similarity. So obviously this wasn't noticed, they created it that way.
Oh, so here, so Amalia, let me just continue a bit more, and you'll see where I'm heading to. Okay, I think your comment is very good. So, if we return to Micha, I see your hand is up.
Just, you said that the fourth cup is like the symposium, but the symposium, it seems like they had food from the diagram you had before. But where's here we're saying you can't have food, just drink.
You're exactly. Thank you, Micha. That's exactly the point. That there is a tension in this text, and that's where I'm heading to. On the one hand, the Mishnah adds another section to the meal, which is standardly identified as the symposium section. That's on the one hand. I mean, they could have done without it, right? They could have just had all the Hallel. I mean, what are you doing? You're finishing the Hallel. So say the Hallel in the middle of the meal, like you said the first part of the Hallel, right? And why are you adding another section? By adding another section, that means that you're saying, look, I want to model it according to the symposium, but you're doing something, and that's I think here we can see the subtlety of what the rabbis are doing. You're doing something, and at the same time, you are in fact undermining it. So you're saying a statement. You're saying there is a symposium, but that is not that's not the main part of my meal, right? So and here comes another part. So what the rabbis are doing, I would say, two strange things, or things that are unexpected. One thing, that they're minimizing the fourth cup. It's only one cup, and you don't eat. I mean, you can't eat anymore, so you just drink. You say the Hallel, and that's it, right? There you're finished. And on the other hand, they enhance the second cup. They make the main part of the discussion not after the meal, but in the middle of the meal, right? And here we see that, right, that all of the discussion, in contrast to Plato, where the discussion was after the meal, when you finished eating, and then you would start having the celebration and drinking. And then when you drink, you also start saying all kinds of philosophical ideas, etc. Here, you have to maintain the talk and the discussion within the structure of the meal, right? So when the meal ends, the discussion ends. Right? You haven't like a final part just to have some form of minimal symposium. You have a part of, you finish the Hallel, but the main part of it is in the middle. Now the question is, why should the rabbis structure the meal in such a way. So what I would suggest is that in fact the rabbis are aware of two models for a festive eating in the Roman world. One model, which I would say is the more popular model, is this kind of partying that after you eat, you start going crazy. Right? After you eat, you do the drinking and it's endless and there's no end to it, and just enjoy and eat, etc. and go out and party. That's one model. And that is a threatening model, right? Because there are no limits, there are no boundaries to such activity. And they're very clear to say, look, they create such a stage in order to, like Philo, I'm aware of the similarity, but here are the boundaries that I set, and you're not allowed to do anything more. But at the same time, they are incorporating a second model. And the second model is what I would call, or what we know from literature, from ancient literature, is the feast of the scholars. How does a scholarly feast look like? So it's lucky we don't have to guess. There's a text that shows us exactly how it works. And this text is called Deipno Sophistae of an author of the 3rd century. He wrote this book more or less when the Mishnah was written. His name is Athenaius of Naukritas. And Athenaius, Deipno Sophist, is the meal, Deipno is meal, the meal of the learned people. Now these learned people are not philosophers. They're much more people of the text. They're much more similar to the rabbis as we know them. And what they do is they make the meal, I mean, if we're coming together to study, what is the way to do it? Should we study over wine or should we study over food? Those are the models, because we're studying not in a study hall, in the Beit Midrash. We're coming together for a meal, and we want to transform it into an intellectual event. So instead of, we're not Plato that moves into, talks about eros and love and all these issues, having drunk wine. No, we're a much more sober model. And when intellectuals in the Roman world come together to eat, they use the meal as a starting point for their intellectual discussions. And how do you do that? That's very simple. You bring out the wine is brought out. And so one of the learned participants, as Athenaius shows us, would say, I remember where I can quote the places in Homer where wine is mentioned. And then he starts quoting, like the rabbi that knows all the Torah by heart. So he starts quoting this source. And then another one says, yes. And there is a difference. There are various verbs that you can use when you describe drinking wine. And then he quotes various texts just to show, to make the meal the starting point for a literary activity, studying literature through the meal, right? So, and that creates like an appetite as you eat. You connect to the sources, and that's a starting point to walk through these texts. And that's actually what also happens in the Seder itself, right? We have the foods, Pesach, Matzah, Umarov, these main parts of the meal, right? And each of them we use to, we connect the word with the verse, right? We mention the word, the meaning of the word, we quote the verses that they appear in, and from there we can start saying the story of the Haggadah. We use all kinds of practices of eating as indications of the event that we're in, right? So that's a model that the rabbis did not invent. It's very important to say. So the model that the fact that we're sitting around food, talking about the food and connecting it to a historical memory and to interpretation of texts, that's exactly what the deipnosophistos, the scholars of the meal do, right? So what I'm saying is that if when the rabbis are choosing one model over the other, they're not saying, hey, all the Gentiles, the Goyim, have their way of feasting and I'm doing it in a different way, like Philo would say. But the rabbis are within, they know, they're aware of the subtle differences between cultural models within the Roman world, and they're choosing one model and rejecting the other. They're choosing the intellectual model and rejecting the popular model. So it's more of an elitist choice of a kind of look that when we bring our children and everybody participates in the meal, everybody becomes part of the meal of the scholars. It's a scholarly meal, and everybody has to take part in it, ask questions, answers, etc., etc. And there we end. We don't want this evening to transform into something else, to transform into a symposium. Okay, so I think that reading closely the Seder and the Mishnah could really help us answer the basic question that I asked in my opening sentence. What is the significance of partial resemblance, right? How can we interpret the meaning of what the rabbis are doing, the complex interplay as they try to address their cultural surroundings, right? And the halacha is the way, the rabbi's way, to offer this kind of more complex solution, or find a path within the different models. And what I find fascinating is the fact that they're really offering something that it's a subtle solution, right? It's not black and white. It's not rejecting or accepting, but it's choosing a specific way to integrate into the cultural world. Okay, if there's a question, I'm glad to take it, but I want to leave 5 minutes for a recess. Please, Sarah.
Yeah, I want to ask, do you think Homer had a status of scripture in this culture? Because if Homer does not have the status of scripture, I would argue that this is very significant difference. Because when we say what we say, it's not an intellectual discussion, according to my understanding. It's a very ritualistic saying. It's like a speech act. מי שלא אמר שלושה דברים אלה, לא יצא ידי חובה, and so on and so forth.
Obviously, there is what you're doing is, what the Mishnah is doing, it's taking a model and it's making it accessible. Everybody can participate. You're right that they're not demanding everyone to be a scholar, right? But we know in the Seder itself, we mentioned the rabbis that are sitting all night and studying, right? So there are those who could develop this meal. And so what you do, you create the basic structure modeled after this Roman form of scholarly talk, and now you decide to what degree you participate. I don't see it as 100% ritual, right? As a speech act, but that's a basic tension within the Haggadah.
And what about?
Please, yeah. No, I wanted to let Neil ask, please.
Hi. So, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Neil or Nachum Twersky. So isn't there an overarching, halakhic theme? I missed the first 2 minutes of your introduction, and I'd just call that, all this is part of Sipur Mitzrayim, and seeing, through the lens of Maimonides, of which I'm trying to recall, the architecture of the Seder, keeps going through Sipur, so that even the meal, which you're saying is somewhat of a separate part, if I hear your definition correctly from its being a scholar's meal, it's all part of, a continuum. And that continuum, is Sipur. Even maybe this is not halachic or historical, but someplace I remember, then the fact that Hallel, is before and after, relates to this whole tension that you discuss, because it's all part of Sipur. The unfolding the story isn't just at the Rabban Gamliel moment. It starts, from the beginning, with the beginning of Magid. So I'm trying to understand within your presentation.
It's a whole, just to talk, we didn't talk about the Magid. I mean, there's much to say. I just discussed the structure, right? And now we would have to delve into the Magid. The Mishnah doesn't talk about Sipur. The Mishnah talks about Midrash, and that's a big difference, right? The Mishnah is a scholar, presents it as a scholarly practice. Okay? V'doresh me'arami oved avi, right? He gives drashot of that section in the Torah as much as he can, right? So I think a sipur is a different way to describe the Seder. I'm not sure the Mishnah follows that way. Okay, I think we'll stop here. Well, I'm glad to see Yedida. So, and I'm sure you'll enjoy her shiur in a moment. But you have a few minutes to rest between the shiurim. Thank you very much.